Good morning. And I see we already have people in our room. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. You have joined us for the Clinical Trials OBQ, and I'm sure because you've seen the title, you're here for a reason. So we're going to start this meeting off. Should I wait a minute, guys, do you think? To see how many other people join us, or should I just go ahead and start?
We can wait a few minutes if you feel
Yeah.
like it, Christine.
Let's wait a minute, but in the meantime, Taya, you haven't met our guests, so can you introduce yourself to our guests?
Sure. My name is Taya Romero. I am the Director of Alliance Management for a company called Scout, and we provide vendor services for clinical trials. And we put patients first. We do reimbursements and just really focusing on patients having a good outcome and really sticking with the clinical trial once they commit to it. We try to help them in any way we can maintain that momentum to stick with it. So that is what I do. Thank you, Christine.
No problem. And I did see Michael for a second, and then I saw him drop off. Was he coming? Maybe he accidentally popped in. We have a few people in the room, so I would say let's get our discussion started so that we don't go over time and we don't keep all of you. Today's conversation is sponsored by Consuli, and I do not have that note on on what exactly I am supposed to read on Consuli. Hold on. Here we go. Sorry, I'm also getting a call from Stanford at the same time. It seems like on a Friday, everything is going haywire for all of us. So, anyways, welcome everyone. I'm pleased to be moderating this month's LinkedIn audio discussion. So, as we get started, a few LinkedIn audio helpful hints. First, please take the time to use the invite button at the bottom of your screen to invite your friends and colleagues to this event. If you have a lot of followers and want to narrow down your search, you can use words like clinical trials or research. Maria is going to be recording our discussion, and we will include the link in our summary post on LinkedIn, as well as in our Clinical Trials One Burning Question LinkedIn group. Feel free to tap on profiles, follow me and all of our moderators and panelists here today, and be sure to check out and follow others in the room where you are inspired. We do encourage audience participation in the second half of our program, so if you find yourself inspired, please feel free to raise your digital hand and we'll do our very best to get everyone. If we have a lot of participation, we may bring a few up to speak and then bring them back into the audience to allow for more speakers, because LinkedIn doesn't allow us to bring everybody up. You will also see the emoji button at the bottom of your screen. You can use that to respond if you want to be involved but are not prepared to speak. So I want to welcome all of you to our Clinical Trials OBQ LinkedIn audio today. My co-moderators and I have designed Clinical Trials OBQ for clinical trials, pharma, biotech, and industry professionals, and patients and patient advocates interested in solving one burning question in clinical trials. We hold these sessions monthly. The next one is currently scheduled, I think it was the 15th, but I'm not sure. We'll have to confirm with Maria on that afterwards. And so tune in and make sure that you're following us. If you're not a part of the Clinical Trials OBQ group on Facebook, send a request and we'll let you in. So to start off, I'm sure most of you know who I am, but just for background reference, my name is Christine Von Raesfeld. I am a patient advocate and work really just trying to infuse the voice of patients into healthcare. And I'm seeing right now that our OBQ for next month is scheduled for April 19th. So I was only a few days off. So on our panel today, we have some of our co-moderators. Taya, do you want to introduce yourself really quick, and then we'll go to our guests? I know Elizabeth is driving, so we're going to leave her out of the introductions. But Taya, do you want to introduce yourself really quick?
Sure. My name is Taya Romero. I've been in the clinical research industry for about 20 years now. I am the Alliance Director for a company called Scout, and we provide vendor solutions for clinical trials. We really help patients maintain their momentum to stay in clinical trials. We have reimbursements, we do trainings, we do all kinds of things focused on the patient. So I will pass it now to Lindsey. Lindsey.
Actually, I think we're going to skip Lindsey for a minute. I'm going to really quick just talk about Consuli because I want to totally focus on Lindsey and Ella as our guests. So I want to make sure they have a lot more time to introduce themselves. Is that okay with you, Ella, Lindsey?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep, fine.
Cool. So really quickly, for those of you who don't yet know Consuli, broadly, Consuli is a public benefit company, a B Corp, with a mission to enable individuals to participate in the data economy. Oh, hold on, I got to decline a call. In the data economy. Experts suggest that our individual health data is worth $20,000 a year, although I think it is a lot more. Consuli helps people choose who gets access to and how their personal information is used, and if and when desired, to get them paid for their data and can make medicine better. Consuli does this by operating a marketplace for members where Consuli becomes their agent. Members receive smart-matched individual offers from Consuli for opportunities, including to participate in clinical trials and data trials. There is no cost for individuals to join the Consuli movement. Consuli offers sponsors of data and clinical trials a unique opportunity to find and reach individual members. You can learn more about consuli.net and individuals can readily join, and sponsors can fill out the Contact Us form to indicate their interest in exploring a relationship. Maria is also posting a link for ease on our event page for LinkedIn. So Maria, I hope you have that ready and have that up there.
It's already up there, guys. You can go into the summary of the event and you will find all of the links that Christine will mention during the event.
And I see that Michael has joined us again. Michael, you want to say hi before we get into the introduction of the topic and our guests?
Thanks, Christine. I apologize. Life goes on. The phone was ringing when I logged in earlier. So want to say welcome to everybody here. I'm excited to see the terrific people that we've added to the panel this morning. And I think this is a very, very timely topic. And look forward to hearing more about it. I do a tremendous amount of work in the clinical development arena, and I'm happy to participate today. So thanks, Christine, for all your work on this.
No worries. I think it's a very timing, a topic that's, it needs to be talked about. So to help us explore this topic, I'm joined by two guests with so much insight to share on their own. And just a brief, really quick, why we are talking about this. And our one burning question for the day is, I just lost my place on here. But basically, we're looking at how industry-sponsored and how research can be combined and what kind of benefits are given back to patients. Maria, do you have my question? Can you read the question for me?
Sure. So the question of the month this time is, how can both industry-sponsored research and publicly funded research be designed to better serve patients?
Thank you. Sorry, it really is one of those days today. And so I'm going to introduce our two guests. I'll read a little bit about them and then I'll let them talk as well. But first, Ella Balasa. Ella is a patient advocate, consultant, and a person living with cystic fibrosis. She has committed her time to empowering patients and advancing healthcare strategies. She speaks publicly about the value of patient perspective and has a passion for distilling clinical information for patient communities. Through opportunities working with healthcare organizations on content strategy, writing, speaking, clinical trial development, and sharing the patient experience, she aims to affect the healthcare landscape by raising awareness of rare diseases, promoting self-advocacy to patients, and valuable insights to organizations. And also joining our discussion is Lindsey Wahlstrom-Edwards. Lindsey is the patient partnership lead for Sano Genetics and was the primary caregiver for her daughter, Rona, who died from a rare disease at the age of 6. Lindsey has spent the past decade collaborating directly with advocacy organizations and advocates to create partnerships in the research space. She has also participated in 5 research studies, 4 of which were related to her child's care. In her former professional life, Lindsey spent 10 years teaching community groups to use creative communications to promote behavior change. She is a firm believer that regardless of the industry, co-creation with all stakeholders leads to better outcomes. So feel free to follow Ella and Lindsey and directly on LinkedIn and stay in touch after our call today. So back to our topic now. And the reason why I really am pushing for this discussion is, as many of you know, I'm involved heavily in the All of Us research. I'm also an undiagnosed rare disease patient myself and looking to really coordinate my own care. And what I'm seeing is, as I participate in a lot of research, that the information isn't going back to me, it isn't going back to my physicians. And I think we really need to sit down and have a discussion on how we involve patients in clinical research and how we really provide benefits back to our patient communities as well. And so, Lindsey, I'll start with you. Sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot.
No, it's fine.
No pressure at all. But we want to start with you because you have both the industry and the personal experience kind of down pat at this point, I'd say. Do you want to kind of touch a little bit on what you're seeing on the industry side when it comes to recruitment and the research side?
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually really good timing because I literally an hour ago left the Patients as Partners conference. I've spent the last couple of days talking about this and hearing updates from industry on what's going on. So I think one of the key observations that I have coming out of the conference is the first time I came was the first year of the conference, which I think was about 7 years ago. And it was such a small group. It was tiny. And now it's this huge group. And the conversations are around the same topics, but it does feel like the needle shifted a bit. So in terms of engagement and the recruitment side, at least, there are a lot more things like patient panels happening. There are co-creation case studies that we're starting to see. And obviously, I wish that we weren't still having the same conversations. Like, I wish we'd solve the problem. We could move on to the next thing now. And I don't think anyone's had found the magic bullet, right? Like, I think one of the things that we run up against is when we're dealing with large corporations or topics like healthcare, we all want to have a process or this approach, we can follow. But as we all know, every patient group is different. And every need of the individual is different too. So there are definitive challenges. I think we have a long way to go in terms of how we're engaging people. I always say we need to do it early and often. So from the point of thinking about what are the outcomes that we want to be measuring, what actually matters, that can be lacking. In my own personal experience in a trial, I was telling Christine, I think this conversation between us started in California a few months ago.
Yeah,
yeah,
it was.
We were having a conversation that the week before my daughter died, we were in the hospital, and the doctor kept saying, it was the study lead, kept saying, we're going to get a graft. We're going to get a graft. She was getting a stem cell transplant. And I said, okay, but I'm not talking about a graft. I'm talking about survival. And she said, yeah, that doesn't look as good. And I said, okay, so now that we're talking the same language, we can actually have a conversation. So when I say co-creation, I mean, from the beginning, having conversations, what are the outcomes that matter when we think about quality of life over quantity of life, extending the period where people can be having a full and meaningful engagement with their loved ones and the things that they love to do, and not necessarily just extending that period of end of life in a hospital or a hospice care setting. So there's a lot of work that can be done still. And one of the other things that comes out quite a bit, and I know I'm summarizing everything very high level, so if anyone has questions or wants to challenge me or go into discussion, I'm always happy to do that. But we run up a lot against regulation. And regulation can be, it's a tricky one because everyone interprets it slightly differently. So if you're in the US, often you'll hear different companies interpreting guidance or our ability to engage with communities directly in different ways. So some organizations are very comfortable with things like comments on a Facebook post, and other companies say absolutely not, that's in violation of our policies, it's against regulations. So there's a lot of ambiguity. The FDA is doing a lot of guidance this year. I mean, it has been like Christmas every week. So many things coming out to help us get to more clarity, but that's something that we run up against. And then the regulations vary by country. And so I was at a meeting in London a few weeks ago where some of the individuals were talking about how they can't return results of studies to patients via an advocacy group because it can be interpreted as promoting a drug if the study was successful in meeting its endpoints, and you can't promote a drug, you can't do any direct to consumer advertising. So I think regulatory is sort of an area to explore. Engagement of HCPs. Ultimately, we can do as much as we want early and often on a protocol, but if the experience at a site is terrible, or if you don't have a good experience with the study leads, you're not going to meet your targets for engagement, and also it won't be a good experience for participants, and it can turn them off to research. So there are a lot of stakeholders to manage. I think it's a multifaceted problem, and lots of room for improvement.
And I want to touch on really quick. You had mentioned that, driving people away from research, and one of the things that I have noticed in my Ella, I want to get your thoughts on it, is that we're losing people to research. And I think because everybody has such a general idea of what the pharmaceutical industry is, what research is, we're not getting participants, and we won't, right? I think we're going to lose more and more unless we clarify a lot of these things and really come up with benefits for these populations. And I had shared with Ella this morning earlier on a call, I was talking to a normal patient who his drugs weren't working. He asked me what his options would be. I told him there were a lot of trials running in the space that he was in. And the first thing he told me was that he's not a guinea pig. And then as our conversation went on, he even went as far as to say, because I said I participate in research all the time, studies, whatever I can get in. And he said, if you're willing to give up your life for pharma profits, that's on you. And so I think for us in the clinical trial space, we think that we're getting this involvement and people are actively engaging, but there's a whole population of people who is being driven away from research because of this potential profit. So Ella, do you, from your patient perspective and what you see and how you've seen, what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, well, just to comment on that piece there, I think that in general, still there's a lot of lacking transparency, on the part of within clinical research too, on the behalf of pharma. I think that, patients often do feel like they're the guinea pigs, or they're being used, or their data is being collected and not being returned, and they don't have that insight and understanding of how their data that's being collected in the trial is used, and what their impact was, right? Like understanding, so important for patients to know and understand their value as a participant, and how they have contributed to research and advancing understanding of diseases. And so I think that's a really important piece. On top of course, making sure that patients, the burdens are being minimized, and that there is those considerations for how patient-reported outcomes are actually capturing information that is valuable in understanding that patient's lived experience, and capturing even the development of endpoints that are really getting to understand and explore and really know how that patient is affected by that condition and where there are areas where it needs to be improved and how a treatment can do that. But all of this can only be gathered and understood by involving patients early in drug development and research. And so I think that just really points to where there is, I think, a lot of still gaps in and lacking patient involvement early in drug development. So even before the design of the trial, where there is that information gathering and understanding that community and that population, developing that relationship there, and then of course in the design of trials that are not having having these secondary endpoints that have all of these testing requirements, that really isn't adding a lot of value to the patient, but only making a trial participation more burdensome. And so I think having that attention paid to how can a trial be designed to make sure that it is having the most gathering as much information as possible to and insights into the how a treatment or how a patient deals with a certain condition, but then not overburdening too, to make sure that we're not losing patients even before they're enrolled because they're seeing the requirements and the burden and just being immediately deterred. So I think that part of that too. So that's one part. And then the other part too is in those conversations where patients are getting, having the consenting process, making sure that that experience is building that relationship with patients so that their questions are being answered. They're understanding what is going to happen to them in the trial. They're understanding that they will have their data returned to them in what way and how that can be used for their own care. I think an important concept now is using clinical research as a care option. And that part of that means that patients can obtain that data and use that to communicate with their care providers outside of a trial, and making sure that they are aware of what's going on with that patient. And so that just helps to facilitate that streamlining of care and just that holistic approach. So I kind of touched on a lot of different things here. But,
It's fine. I want to touch on a couple of things that you have said. I'm not sure if people are aware in the room, but I'm working on a project now with Stanford and Research to the People. And what we've been able to do is really, or start to combine the research part with my actual clinical care. Since everything is under Stanford's roof, it makes it a little bit easier. And so I do think a lot of this publicly funded research that's being done, we could be providing raw data back to patients in order to really spark innovation in a different way, with some training. But I also wanted to you brought up consent, and I was in a conversation with a woman a few weeks ago who had mentioned that she said consent at point of care is coercion. And so how do we have these discussions and do things in a way that really does benefit patient communities? I know you've both talked about engaging people earlier, but what are some of the things that you see that have worked, or where you see that engagement really pushing the envelope? I have an example, but I'd love to hear your guys' first. Ella, Lindsey,
I
you
think
go.
I think it's building that relationship with communities early on, as far as getting into the conversations with advocacy organizations. It's engaging, it's interfacing with small patient populations and groups where you're providing resources or addressing a need, or whether that's providing more information, expanding, health literacy and understanding for helping patients understand more about what is involved in trial participation. There's so much unknown, especially for those that have never participated in a trial. They have no idea what that involves and what that means. And, especially, in the cystic fibrosis space now, they're increasingly too in rare diseases, there's a more focus on gene therapies and what that means. And I think there's just a lot of misunderstanding and confusion. And so, I think that making sure that there are resources and conversations happening from industry, from that perspective, that helps to demystify and explain what does it mean to be, to receive a gene therapy, and what does that mean for your future? What does that mean for your care now? What does that mean for the treatments that you're currently taking or that you will be on in the future? And so I think that's a way that this, early on, even before maybe a trials begins, or, in early phases, where those conversations and that network and that connection is already happening, so that when a drug gets, into the later phases of trials and there's expanding and recruiting, trying to recruit a lot more patients, there's already that awareness, and it makes, making that just a little bit easier to be able to bring on those patients.
Mm-hmm. I agree with a lot of what you said. I think the idea of engaging groups early is critical. I think to having representation from people with a lived experience who are not necessarily the individuals that we always go to, right? So someone who's just I think of like a mother at home with an asthmatic child and 2 other children who are not. We're asking that person to participate in a trial, and how can we make that easier for her to do that, right? How can we do childcare? Can we do study visits outside of the 9 to 5 window? Are there things that we can do to make it easier? So the insights that you get are really critical. I do want to point out that a lot of the things we talk about wanting to have better processes for happen at the point of sight. And so I think sometimes we talk a lot in these conversations about industry and what industry is doing, but we leave out this huge component, which is that you have someone who's sitting in an office close to Pharma Valley right now. So let's say New Jersey, who's writing a protocol, but it's someone in San Antonio, Texas, who's consenting for the study, and they're interacting with the study site. And so that's a gap, I think, and it's part of a bigger conversation around medical care, because to your point, Christine, consent at the point of care is coercion, but it might also be that's where you consent, right? We do some models that have been working pretty well for us. We've been testing them out. We've heard some case studies from others too, where we do genetic testing. So we do education prior to the meeting with the genetic counselor. We roll out modules, and there are tests for comprehension. And if something is not understood, there's additional material provided, and the genetic counselor then will cover that component with the individual during the counseling session. And it's helped to streamline the process and help people to have time to digest the information and then come to that appointment with questions, so that you really feel like you've been able to have a well-informed discussion as you go. And that's worked pretty well. And I think there are some more models for that that we're starting to see come out, which could be interesting. The data return question is always a tricky one. And I think about if you don't have people with a lived experience weighing in on some of these topics, like data return, yes, you want all the data from the study, but there might be some that you could get now that would be really helpful, so you can avoid another blood draw next week. Maybe your veins are scarred from being accessed so many times. So if you could just have the results of the CBC, which is not going to be a proprietary thing, to bring to your appointment tomorrow, you don't have to undergo another blood draw. So there are other things that we can do that help get at some of the concerns and the needs of the individuals who are participating, beyond the study endpoints, where there might be a little bit more concern around sort of unblinding the study or doing something along those. So I do want to point out we do need to engage sites and the providers in these conversations too. And I think we often point it as industry versus patients, and there's so much work to be done, don't get me wrong, but we're missing a really key component of the conversation.
I love that you brought that up. And I think that one of the benefits that I've had from participating in research, I haven't told a lot of people this, but I lost my insurance for a little bit. And in that time, they would not do any testing unless I was going to pay up front in cash. And I don't have the financial means to do that. Some of these tests, as you all know, are extremely expensive. But what I was able to do was then coordinate with one of the studies that I was in. So the urinalysis, the blood tests that they were able to perform were then given back to my doctor. And I do hear that a lot as I go out and speak to physicians, right? That they have patients that are participating in research, but they don't have access to even just the basics from that. If this person has a CT scan that's done as part of this study, how much do we put a patient through if we're doing one thing for research and then going back and having to do that again in clinical care? And I think that's an extremely important point that we all kind of seem to miss. Any thoughts from Taya or Michael as you sit here and listen?
So, Christine, it's Michael, and I'm really appreciating the points of view that both Ella and Lindsey are bringing up here, as well as yourself, Christine, always. I think that, going back to the one burning question here, one of the things that is coming through is the consistent and enduring need for education. Because if I think about the difference between industry-sponsored and publicly funded research, the reality is the one major string that goes between the two of them is the need for additional education. And really helping, because a lot of what we've been talking about are people who successfully get enrolled or engaged in a conversation about clinical trials and research, especially research that could end up being, the so-called opportunity for a cure. But I think that one of the things that's missing here is obviously the more people have to participate. It's and what is keeping, just as you pointed out in the very beginning, what might be driving people away are the complexity, the complications of all of the things that go along with participating in a trial, including transportation and cost of other care, etc., child care and things of this nature. It just is something that isn't getting resolved by the current lack of cooperation between industry-sponsored and publicly funded research. So, while we're talking about what's happening with those people who get engaged, it's all those people who need and could benefit from clinical trials that aren't getting into this. That is a concern of mine. And I just put that forward to the group here to say, how are we going to get industry-sponsored and publicly funded research to change that? I mean, just as a factoid for you, there are fewer than 4% of patients who are eligible for most oncology trials who ever get enrolled in a trial. And that means there's 96% of the people who need a trial who, for whatever reasons, including ignorance, can't get engaged. So I'll leave it there.
What
Can I
you
jump
said.
in?
Yeah, go for it.
I just wanted
Lindsey.
to yeah,
you.
Michael,
Go ahead.
it was me. I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I think this is a space where there are two sides to this, and it actually ties a little bit back to the point that I was meant to speak on today. So one is people need to be aware of trials, and we need to give access, and that's tied in large part to design and to how we go about engaging communities. So I always talk about how I hate when people helicopter in. Coca-Cola is successful because their marketing strategy is to get engaged and stay engaged. And we have not learned that as an industry. And that is something we need to just hit some of these concerns head on and work through them. And the answers we get, we might not like, but it's something that we need to do. And we need to create space for different points of view, different voices, different versions of and opinions around how research should be conducted to the table to have these conversations. The other thing is it comes down in part to study design. So the complexity of protocols is getting increasingly hard to find the individuals who will be eligible for the trial. And so this comes back to engaging people early and often, because if you're saying, I'm looking for someone who's advanced stage 4 cancer, but they're perfectly healthy in every other way, or even I think about rare disease, rare disease rarely happens in a vacuum. They always say, think horse hooves instead of zebras if you hear the hooves, but like if you see a zebra, there's probably a herd, right? There's gonna be a lot of, often it's rare begets rare. It's not just one thing. It's the same with autoimmune. And so how protocols are written can really influence who's eligible to partake in these trials, and where sites are selected and where people are engaged also really affects who's eligible to partake in trials. So I think that's a fantastic point, and it's probably 8 conversations worth of topics to go through, but thank you for bringing that into the conversation.
I'll just quickly add to that. I mean, I couldn't agree with those points more. Personally, I've not participated in an investigational drug trial because of ineligibility criteria. So, I have less than 40% FEV1, which is a measure of lung function, and uh, pretty much all new drug trials for cystic fibrosis to this point have a requirement of at least 40%. And so falling under that, for majority of my adult life, I've never had the opportunity, yet I'm somebody that is willing and eager to participate. But I think this also, this also ties into the need for engaging with the community, listening and trying, but then the development of novel endpoints or restructuring, adaptive design of trials. So rethinking really trial design and master protocols and how they can accommodate a more diverse patient population. That can certainly also help with recruitment efforts. But then this takes into account, that the need for that kind of innovation that can be hard, in a space that is a little bit slower to change, and that new types of, although we're adopting, AI and a lot of new innovations rapidly, or coming to realize their value. I still think that they're part of that too is the regulatory aspect, and this is a whole other conversation. But with FDA being used to and understanding how they obtain their data or understand what the data is being represented or presenting, it's not so easy to present some of this new information, new ways of, showing a value of a investigational drug for regulatory. And so that's another piece too that I think limits this, although it's a multifaceted problem, but still, want to make a point that I do very much think that rethinking how, adaptive trial designs and really thinking about new novel endpoints can really help to expand, the possibility or inclusion of patients.
I love that. And I have a question for all of you. Taya, we didn't even hear from you. Do you want to weigh in really quick?
Yes, I would say I think there's been so many great points brought up, but it's also we need to engage sponsors more into understanding that a patient or a participant is a whole person, and they need to be respected as a whole person, and they need to be compensated for their time. They need to be respected for the time they miss from work, from their families to participate. And it's not just about enrolling the patient, it's about maintaining them in the trial. So I think there's so much focus on enrollment numbers and recruiting, but how are we going to maintain throughout? Because we can get them in the door, but it's not going to give us the science we need to make, decisions, real decisions about these medications, and to have the data points we need. So I just wanted to add that. Back to you, Christine.
No, thank you. And I also think if there's a way when we're looking at our budgets to really stop looking and focusing so much on the recruitment, but how do we keep them retained, right? What are the benefits that we're giving back to these communities and able to make that happen instead of it being a one and done kind of relationship that so many people have with these disease spaces? I do see that we have someone with a hand raised. So Maria, I don't know if you want to bring them up.
Sure.
We'll get to you in a second. But any other comments from my panelists while we're waiting for our guests to come up, and anyone else that might have a comment, please feel free to raise your hand and we'll bring you up. But I do think it's an important conversation as we move forward, that how do we do this in a way that really does benefit our patient communities and keeps them actively involved as we move forward? Our guest is up, and I don't want to mispronounce your name. Can you say it for me?
Good. Are you talking about Bakari?
Yes, I am. Bakari.
Thank you.
you.
If to save your energy, you can say Buck, the American currency. So thank you very much.
Good name for the conversation.
You're welcome. Thank you. And I love the smile, because we're dealing with complex issues sometimes in life. We need to have a sense of humor to deal with situation. We pause, we reflect, and then thank you very much. So I wanted to listen because I bumped into this. I don't know, God wanted me to connect the universe. So, and I wanted to listen because I'm curious. I'm currently about to pursue research. So anyway, because the reason why I was influenced to speak, the lady Lindsey mentioned about Coca-Cola, about their let me say their brand positioning about engagement. Yeah. And because my background revolves around traditional business, and then my recent master's is design innovation management. And then also Tia mentioned about designs. Lindsey talk about design. Ella talk about design. As a result of that, I felt the need, because we're dealing with complex issues. The purpose of doing a research is to actually solve problems or perhaps generate new ideas in that area of research. So I'm one of the person I read and I care about humanity. At the end of the day, so to fund, because as a result of that, I mentioned about, and the other lady mentioned about innovation. I think I've got a book that I'll publish by the end of this year, because the word innovation has been misconstrued in the field of research in society. So that's where, because we're dealing with complex issues. If you go back and research about this, it started at the design school, the day school in America, during the late 60s and 90s, design thinking. It was a movement. They were using traditional way of dealing with business research. So all the three ladies I spoke about, you all talked about designs. When you're solving the problems, and one of the I would say mistakes or the missing opportunity to capture the opportunity to create valuable insights. Because if you're trying to solve a complex issue, the customer, the end users of the medication and everything, they all have to be part of the design process. And then you were talking about stakeholder analysis. So design thinking was introduced in the 70s to deal with situations like this. So my encouragement for most of you here, professionals and everything, is something that I want you all to think about. Design thinking has to be part of, because you cannot innovate without using, because a design thinking is about business tools, using a mindset, leadership, collaborations, as we all hear. All of these are insights that will drive innovation. And I think, if I'm correct, 2009, Tim Brown, one of the founders of Edye, and published a research, Harvard Business Review. I think it even conducted a research, medical research. So, and its definition about design thinking and innovation for any product or service or whatever you're trying to bring into society, if you consider as innovation, it has to include three different factors and during the design process. So feasibility, viability, and desirability. The desirability is for the target audience, the patients or we're trying to solve their problem. So you get them a part of the process. We use holistic approach, human-centered design. So when you do that, you stakeholder analysis, you get them involved in the process rather than using what we call in the field of strategy, you use product push versus market push. Because product push is where strategies or the research design is based on the expertise, on the researcher designers technologies, just like the AI. So AI cannot understand empathy. You can use AI for different things. So empathy, if we're doing research or all the funders, they need to understand that. So when you use empathy, you get that meaningful insight that will drive innovation. That's what I wanted to share. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I know that we have 2 other guests that are raising their hand as well. Well, now we have 3. We are at 9:49. So we're bringing up a few different people, Iona, and then I thought I saw John Linnell somewhere. I'm not sure if he's caught in the mix of getting up. But Iona, I hope I said that right. Do you have a comment? And I see John back in the bottom queue.
Yes, thank you so much, Christine, for bringing me up. This is a topic very dear to me because I lost my husband more than 12 years ago to cancer. And it was a very quick illness over 6-7 weeks. We had a toddler and a baby back then. They are teenagers now. And over the last 10 years, I've worked with a lot of parents also who lost their partners to cancer. And I know you guys were thinking about how can we address the patients. The patients are totally overwhelmed a lot of times in those situations, even more than us partners. But what would have absolutely helped would be to give some kind of meaning to what was happening. And I think I can talk to make 90% of everyone who has been affected that the search for meaning is like a side effect of cancer. Why us? Why not? What is happening? And participating in a trial, even if someone passes away, is a way of leaving a bit of a legacy or making some kind of sense of giving it a little bit of a meaning to something that is really horrific at the moment that it's happening, especially for young people and younger people. But I think this search of meaning would be is a high motivator to participate, even more than just the hope of actually finding a cure or finding something that works. That is also really a high motivator in that situation. And after, I can also address, I think Lindsey was saying about family and family support. For sure, me and my partner, we were so young, we were around in our 30s back then. We'd absolutely participated in any trial, but I had no capacity. I had to work and take care of the kids, and he was in hospital and so on. So childcare would have been like one of the biggest help and support to free up time in order to make this meaningful contribution that is absolutely highly valued. And I don't think it's ignorance and people don't want to join. I think that is definitely overwhelm. And with good support systems, you would reach much more people because the motivation would be there. So thank you so much. I'm listening. Very, very interesting. And lovely greetings from Switzerland.
Thank you for joining us. And I have John and Sabine. John, what's your perspective John is a patient advocate in the COPD space? John, what are your thoughts? I see you there, but you might be on mute. I hope.
If it's not connecting, John, maybe go drop back into the audience and then raise your hand again. Sometimes it glitches.
And I keep getting kicked off. That's why I keep disappearing from the top. Don't we go to you before we go to John? If we can connect to you as well.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Sorry if there's noise. I just popped out of the hospital. It was a very interesting topic, and I've maybe missed part of the conversation, but I work as a statistician in UK in a NHS trial unit, specifically in oncology, and we've been kind of focusing a lot of patient involvement, and I've also had conversations and spoken with some researchers in America, and I think, as you've mentioned before, I think educating people is a very big part of the patient involvement, because I've heard a lot of times, especially in States, people are concerned about their data and that who's going to use it. And sometimes it's the same in the UK, but what we've been kind of trying to do is talking with the patients and involving all different types of trial staff, like involving statisticians, explaining the analysis and what actually is going to, which I think was mentioned before, like to kind of balance the conversation. And the other point I wanted to make, I know there's been some changes now in America, but I think one of the advantages we have in UK is that we have the NHS system. So it's much easier to identify eligible patients for all different trials. So with this big system, you easily get a text message from your GP practice based on your records that, oh, we think you match the records, you would be eligible for this trial. Here's the brief description. If you want to come and talk with a nurse, let us know. And another advantage, I think, Christine, you mentioned before about the tests and how much, especially with like oncology trials, you don't want to expose patients to too much radiation or different therapies. So currently on the trials I'm working with, we kind of try and make it that the patients don't have to make extra visits to the hospital, or even if they go to the GP for their checkup, kind of the data would be obtained from standard of care. So patients wouldn't need to get extra blood tests or extra radiation, which I think also kind of increases the amount of people that are willing to participate. But yeah, it's a very complex thing. And also, just quickly, another struggle we've kind of faced with pharmaceutical trials is that obviously the pharma, a lot of time they're only interested to see the effect of their drug, and a lot of times if it's not helping majority of the patients recruited, they just want to stop the trial and kind of not provide the medication anymore. So we've been kind of trying to advocate that the drugs still should be provided for the full planned cycle to those patients that are having some benefits, because I think also then in long term, if they do get the full cycle of the drugs and it is helping them, they are more likely to participate in other trials. But hopefully it added some of the to the conversation.
It did. And I also would like to state, you also have European values, which we don't have in the United States. So there's a big difference there as well. We are coming up on a time. John, I want to get to you, and then I'm going to go to everyone for some closing remarks. But John, go for it. If we can hear you. Are you on mute, John? I see the green line around you. I'm dying that when things like go wrong on getting people up on stage. John, why don't you play around on your end, and I'll take some closing remarks from all of our panelists and our guests. But Ella, any thoughts, or maybe I should save you for last because you are one of the patients, and if we can't get John on here, I'd like your feedback. So, Lindsey, any thoughts? As we wrap up our conversation, what do you think? What would be your blue sky idea on how we could really benefit patients on both the industry and the publicly funded research?
Oh, my blue sky. I mean, I am known for saying I think we should burn it all down and start over. But oh wait, is that John? Was that John, or did someone else agree with me? Did John get in?
I don't know. John, is that you?
Thought I heard someone. Is that you, John? No. Okay. Well,
No.
I first of all, I never said thank you for having me on today, so excuse my poor manners. It's been a really enjoyable conversation, and I've loved hearing the feedback both from the other panelists and from the audience. I think I've been taking notes during the conversation because there's a lot of great points to follow up on here. I think if we were going to shift the conversation and really like move the needle significantly, if I had to choose one thing, it would be to involve all of the stakeholders. So that would be patients, that were research participants, I think caregivers too, because we often overlook caregivers, and that's a huge part of the equation. And the site staff, and the pharma companies or the study teams who are designing the trials, and that it would be a coalition model who builds out protocols, and make that a requirement, because I think that would actually help to eliminate some of the challenges that we see. If everyone had a voice early, if everyone was looking at the burden on the participant, also the burden at the site level. I mean, nurses work hard, so do doctors, but nurses really work hard. They have a lot to do. And then if you add in a bunch of admin on top of it, it can be a challenge. So I would encourage us to include everyone in the conversation from the beginning and use that to move the needle.
Perfect. Taya, thought?
Yes, I would encourage everyone in the audience to follow Lindsey and Ella and look for ways that they can support patient communities and spread the word. Clinical trials are here, and we should be pushing for better research.
Thank you. Michael, any remarks from you?
Yeah, I'm just gonna, Christine.
I know you probably have a ton of things to say.
I mean, obviously, one of the beauties of the clinical trials OBQ format here is we get to tee up some really important questions and controversies. I'll just add a controversy or a controversial proposal here. I think that we need to be teaching the value and the importance of clinical trials in secondary school education when kids have their health classes. I think what people need to understand is that this can be a very big lifetime answer to health questions that they're going to experience over the next 50 years, 60 years of their life. And we teach a whole bunch of other important personal care kinds of things, and we ought to take the time in our educational system to teach about clinical trials and how they are important to taking care of yourself in the future. So there's one idea maybe for a future OBQ.
I'm all for that. Ella, any closing thoughts? And then I'm going to give you my blue sky.
Yeah, so I mean, thank you for having me. This has been a really, really valuable conversation, and everybody's perspectives have been, really insightful. And I'd have to agree with what Lindsey just said too about, engaging multi-stakeholders really early in those conversations. Bringing in advocacy groups, bringing in the FDA, bringing in CROs, bringing in the sites. I've been a part of a city, the CTTI, or Clinical Trials Transformation Initiative. And they had a multi-stakeholder, network group where it's really the focus is engaging stakeholders early in trial development. And I think seeing more of that would be great. And the conversations that came from that, I think, were really, really valuable. And I think that's a way that we can kind of level set and bring everybody together in that conversation. And then just quickly to a point that Buckery had mentioned too, really, that I think that we need to focus on empathy as a core value and basis upon which we conduct research and make that the focus of improving people's lives, and doing so by understanding not just them as a disease, or the condition, but really having that empathy for the lived experience of dealing with a condition and managing that in the day-to-day life and the challenges and burdens that come with that. And when we can really keep all of that in perspective and in mind when we are, developing treatments, developing trials, all of these things that are ultimately to benefit the greater good and improve people's lives, just making sure that we have that empathy for the patient experience at the core.
Did we just lose Christine?
Yeah, I think we lose her. I can see her on the audience, but there she goes.
Oh, there we go.
I'm back. I'm telling you, I'm in Silicon Valley and we have worst internet connection here.
Also, I don't know. I couldn't hear anybody either. Hopefully people heard what I said.
I heard pretty much all of it until the last 30 seconds when I got kicked off. So, but I want to say, well, first I want to thank you all for being here. If I could throw out my blue sky idea is that if we have publicly funded research returning raw data back to patients, and we should allow them and educate them in a way to use their data so that we can spark innovation in new ways and not wait for drugs to be discovered and tested on us, but actually be involved from the very beginning with that finding what needs to be done. And so for me, I think it's giving that back and then allowing patient groups to share that with different organizations who are working towards those things. But that's just my thought. We'll see how it goes. And we are over time, and I'm hoping I don't get disconnected while we're closing this out. But this has been a truly insightful conversation. And I want to extend a deep thank you to our guest speakers, Ella and Lindsey, for coming on and sharing your experience, and our co-moderators. We have Michael and Taya. Elizabeth has been in the background, and Maria for all of your help in putting this together. We will have links to all of this on our page. And in closing, we have several ways for you to engage with us further. So if you have suggestions for topics or speakers, or if you're interested in joining us as a guest speaker or co-moderator, we welcome you to reach out to Maria Romero or any of the co-moderators that you see in our stage. And also check out and consider becoming a member of our sponsor, Consuli, or becoming a co-sponsor of this OBQ and other Consuli Convo Dialogue series. So Maria is going to post all of this up there. Lastly, we invite you to join our OBQ LinkedIn group to stay up to date on events and to interact with other members. So I thank you all for joining me. I wish we had hours and hours to discuss it because I know there are so many things we could touch on. But thank you, all of you, for your insights. And Michael dropped off, but really bringing up that education part of it and all of that. So thank you all. I appreciate you coming on. And any last comments before we close out, or just a goodbye?
I just want to say thank you, Christine, for excellent moderation, and Lindsey and Ella and Taya and Michael and all that participated. Very insightful comments. And I think, if we realize the few blue skies that were identified, we'd solve a lot of the issues. So just really want to thank everyone, including and especially Christine and Maria for helping. Thank you.
Well, thank you for letting us host it here and really appreciate it. So we will hear or see all of you next month. I believe it was April 19th. My computer also crashed. So I'm left with nothing.
Yes, April 19th is the date.
Great. So we will see you next time. And thank you again, Lindsey and Ella, especially for hopping on and doing this for me. Thanks.